Good morning. I'm Dr. Mary Madden. I'm a medical sociologist, and I've been invited to talk to you today about a cross-disciplinary research networking project we did, which was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I led it at the University of Leeds with a historian colleague, Dr. James Stark. Since then, I'm currently working on an alcohol-focused project at the University of York, so in a sense you could say that wound care eventually led me to drink. As part of the project, we hosted 3 workshops at the Thackeray Medical Museum in Leeds, which brought together academics from a wide variety of disciplinary backgrounds with health professionals, people from industry, patients and carers, to explore the range of health professions, patients and industries involved in the development of UK wound care and their field of interaction. And we've already heard that the UK is lots of different countries. The science, technologies, materials and techniques used and our relationships with these, the marketing, evidence base and regulation of innovation in advanced wound care, and the role of the UK medical marketplace. I'm going to say a little about each of these, all of which have implications for innovation. Innovation is discussed here as more complex than the simple invention and introduction of advanced products and services. Nurses in wound care have been important innovators in the field in their own right, but have also had a key role as pragmatic transformers of promising innovations from industry into workable and working processes. I'll present the perhaps provocative view that wound care in the UK has become something of a partnership between elite nurses and industry marketing, and what that might mean for present and future innovation. As you all know, many complex chronic wounds are an acute manifestation of an underlying long-term condition. They're increasing in nations with ageing populations and growing rates of immobility, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. The organisation of wound care varies around the world. In the UK, most wound care management occurs in the community with referral to a range of health professionals. It's become something of a Cinderella service subsumed in community nursing. As the National Institute for Health Research Wounds Research for Patient Benefit Programme showed, and we've just been hearing, we don't have good figures for many aspects of wound care activity. Professor Bowden will be speaking about some of the latest figures and why these are important. There are, however, well-documented concerns about a lack of joint service delivery to address the complex needs of individuals with wounds. And as Kath Bowden has said, we know that there's lots of that patients experience lots of variations in clinical practice and there's discontinuities of care. People see lots of different people with different ideas. So in the UK, wound care is a largely nurse-led field, but perhaps somewhat impeded by a persistent view of nurses as subordinate to medics. A small proportion of patients get a referral to see a specialist tissue viability nurse. Since the role came in the 1980s, there have been ongoing concerns about the complexity and diversity of the tissue viability nurse role in the changing demographic and healthcare landscape. Tissue viability nurses have been forced to defend the legitimacy of their role. A lot of time has been spent justifying the relevance of the role and proving it as a nursing specialism, especially as it doesn't have a means of formal qualification. Nurses with graduate or postgraduate qualifications were very much the minority in the 1980s, and as we know, there's been a big change in training expectations for those involved in wound care over time. Although nurses continue to be seen by some as predominantly emotional labourers associated with caring and nurturing, observational research has shown that much nursing work involves making decisions about and administering therapies which require technical skills and critical decision-making capabilities. Is that Paul? I can't go to the next slide for some reason. I seem to have frozen. Sorry?
Point it in that direction.
In their direction. I'm stuck on tissue viability nurses. Stop clicking. Click now. Who am I pointing at? I've frozen. There we are, sorry. I clicked too many times then. Most of the history of wound care focuses on the dramatic and heroic aspects, battlefields and surgery. The control of wound infection is, of course, of particular importance in the history of wound care. Presentations and objects linked to World War I nursing spark memories for nurses at the workshops of the amount of pain that used to be caused by removing dressings. In response to Professor Christine Hallett's presentation on World War I nurses and wound infection, some nurses at the workshops remembered crying when taking dressings off patients in the early years of their own practice. We weren't dealing with gas gangrene, but we were dealing with everything else that Christine described there. Here you can see some responses to the object handling we did at the workshops, assuming Paul can play the video. The dilemmas of a high-tech presentation. It's not having it. Okay, so the link on the first page goes to our website, which has all of the videos that I wanted to play today on, so you can see it there. But in that clip, we did some object handling where we got the curators from the Thackeray Medical Museum to bring some objects of wound care over the years, and people engaged with those objects and had lots of discussions around them. So that clip tells you some of the things that came up. Some of the key things were how little has changed in wound care actually, and how recently it is that wound care became a nursing specialism. They were struck by how many of the objects we had were either aimed at or from medics. The historical literature has tended to concentrate on hospital-based acute clinical activity. There's been much less interest in the history of chronic wound care, where health professionals face the particular challenge of uncertainty about how, or indeed if, their efforts relate to outcomes over time. The contemporary frontline of wound care is chronic wounds, but chronic wounds are hardly new, providing, of course, patients survived infection. For example, here we see Nurse Agnes in 1894 seeking advice in nursing notes about leg ulcers which were not responding to treatment, where her patient could not tolerate treatment with terabine and iodoform. District nurse replies, "I can sympathise with Nurse Agnes. I well know the sort of ulcers she speaks about. The cases I remember were too bad to hope to cure. One could only endeavour to keep them clean and comfortable and try and persuade the patients to go into hospital with the hope that amputation would be advised. I have no doubt Nurse Agnes has already tried these simple plans, which were boracic fomentations and bathing in warm water with a little disinfectant added, recommended a bucket. But I felt much sympathy with the difficulty I have myself had experience of." Important innovations in leg ulcer care have, of course, come from nurse-led research, not least compression bandaging and the acknowledgement that leg ulcers are painful for patients. The advent of the NHS and innovations in biomedicine have increased expectations for and of medical intervention across the board. Delayed healing and the resort to amputation are no longer expected, but unfortunately we know that they are still with us. One of the key changes associated with advanced wound care is the paradigm shift from dry to moist wound healing. In 1880, surgeon Samson Gamgee advocated dry, firm, absorbent dressings, disturbed as infrequently as possible. The purpose at the time was to cover the wound, to prevent foreign particles getting in, prevent sticking to clothes and bedding, and to accommodate exudates. The Gamgee dressing was one of the first generation of designed and manufactured dressings. Previously, wound dressings had been largely homemade. The work of George Winter in 1962, observing that wounds in young pigs healed more quickly if covered rather than being left open to the air, is the starting point for advanced wound care because it established the idea that a wound dressing can influence outcomes. Nurses at our workshop said that when this concept of an alternative approach, moist wound healing, came along, we grabbed it, we leapt onto it. They were spurred by the feelings of desperation and discomfort at pain caused by the removal of dried-on dressings described previously. Since upside dressings came on the market in the 1980s, the use of more expensive, quicker and easier to apply wound dressings have featured heavily in advanced wound care. Nurses learnt from company reps about their dressings and how to use them, and a conference circuit grew up as tissue viability nurses began to engage in research with industry, thus adding legitimacy to the tissue viability nurse role. Indeed, many of the organisations that have been set up in wound care would not have been set up at all without industry. Moist rather than dry dressings are easier to remove. They not only cover and absorb, they now claim to create an environment for healing. And increasingly, claims are being made that particular dressings actively promote healing. There is a concern, however, that with this dressing focus, nursing expertise is being reduced to knowing what to put on it, embarking on a perhaps futile quest for the magic dressing that can tackle the manifestation of an underlying condition from the outside. Arguably, dressing development has become dominant, particularly in the UK, because it's financially lucrative and because nurses are allowed or familiar or comfortable with few other tools with which to interact with wounds. Indeed, many of the current ideas in wound care that we haven't been tested thoroughly. There's a limited, poor quality evidence base to underpin most treatment choices, however advanced they claim to be. The European regulatory focus, the CE marking process, means devices are not automatically subject to clinical trial. There's no imperative, therefore, for industry to evidence the effectiveness of products. More clinical trials add costs, and there's a cost evidence, risks, profits conundrum for industry about any innovation. So where is the patient in setting the agenda for innovation? We made a short animation in response to this concern. Can we see if we can play it, Paul?
We all experience wounds. Most wounds heal easily, but a surprising amount are very slow to heal or don't heal at all. They say time is a great healer, but how much time? What if you feel that your life is on hold while you're stuck inside waiting for a wound to heal? We don't know enough about these serious wounds. We need to know how many there are, what works, and how people live with them day to day. We lack basic information and public interest. How do we make wound care sexy? Wound care products, like dressings, are big business. But the biggest costs are actually staff time and the personal costs for patients and their families. There are lots of products, lots of marketing, and lots of guidelines. With all of that competing for attention, it's hard for anyone to sort out grounded claims from irrelevant truths and misinformation. Many of our current ideas about wound treatments haven't been tested thoroughly. Treatments are usually tested by doing clinical trials, but trials are expensive, and if a product is a device rather than a drug, then companies don't actually have to show that it improves health to get it on the market. We've learnt a lot about wounds from the history of surgery and war. Today, people with wounds that are slow to heal often have underlying health conditions, which means they may not have the healing powers of young, fit soldiers. Isn't it time to think about what really matters to the patients who live with wounds? Are patients really at the centre of wound care?
It worked. Thanks to Tom Bailey for the graphics and Big Blue Whale Video Company and Delia Muir for the voiceover. In terms of innovation, there's a concern that perhaps the biggest advance in the field has been marketing, as industry across the board has shifted its focus from manufacturing to marketing. Medical marketing in the UK is aimed at healthcare professionals, not patients. It makes sense to target a manageable number of people with influence. Successful marketing is about resonance. Customer beliefs are strengthened by the marketing of the product. The marketing strength of the product and its message is strengthened by the customer belief. In this way, the slenderest of hypotheses can gain credibility without the initial core being made more substantial through rigorous testing. There's little research on how nurses engage with and respond to wound care marketing practices and the impact of this on patients. In summary, wound care innovation is a complex, contested and lengthy process in which we're all implicated. For all the talk of advance, in many ways we haven't got that far. To understand why this is, we need to look at wound care in context and how a number of different areas interact together. There's an ongoing focus on hospital-based acute clinical activity in healthcare across the board, but this is a field where there's been and still is lots of homemade and home-delivered decision-making, prevention and treatment. We need to meet the needs of a new demographic of patients with long-term conditions living in the community. We need to think about the changing role and influences of industry. That includes the histories of militarism, weapons and wounding, and what we've learned from that and what we're still learning from that. Industrialisation, the shifts from using what's at hand to mass production, changes in materials, marketing and global trade over time, and the impact of our role in bringing products to people. We need to think about developments in scientific medicine, the ongoing challenge of understanding the healing process, how far we've got with the basic science, and our relationship with evidence-based medicine, which has been sometimes unhelpfully positioned in opposition to innovation, and is also relatively new. It also emerged in the 1980s. We need to think about how wound care has become identified with nursing and separated off from linked medical specialisms like surgery, burns, dermatology and others, and what we could fruitfully learn from bridging the gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Any questions? Well, I'll ask one. You made a number of points about things to think about and things to consider. So of the 4 areas you highlighted, what would you say is the main priority?
The 4 areas. Which of the 4 areas? I've mentioned so many things there. Right.
You talked about the different domains, like the fact that at the moment most activities focus on hospital, but we should be looking at other areas. So what do you think of the other areas the main priorities should be?
I think there's just this general whole thing about how we, post-war, we've set up a health service which very much responded to acute healthcare needs. And at this point in history, we have these chronic conditions, ongoing long-term chronic conditions. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in the workshops was about how you can very much look at individual products and that get introduced as innovations, but in terms of service delivery, we haven't got comprehensive ways of thinking about innovation in service delivery. So the NHS itself was a massive innovation, and then it's constantly being disorganised all of the time, and we're all implicated in that, and we're constantly seeking ways of working, but we're also split off from, we've got this historical setting up of disciplines and separations between medical approaches, and then we end up having our own little, we have conferences for this micro bit and that micro bit and this micro bit, and then we have patients who need to access all of those things, and they're the ones who are in the midst of it all, who have to join the whole thing up together. So that's incredibly complex, but it's kind of thinking about, are we thinking about the patient in it all, but we're all kind of in our I don't know, silos within all of that. And it takes an awful lot of conferences to go to piece together all the bits that are implicated in this. So we need to do a bit more joined up thinking in a sense.
Yes, there's a question from Tina.
Thank you, Mary. It's not really a question, actually, but it's just about the art that came out of the project. And I mean, I'm sure you saw lots of the graphics in Mary's presentation and things, but Mary's very kindly provided us with a number of pieces of the work that if you go up to the poster room during one of the break times and things, you'll be able to see it. Thank you very much for that, Mary, because there's some really good stuff there that we can share. Thank you.
Okay. And plug again the website where you can watch videos will explain more about it. Yeah, with your own Wi-Fi that works.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mary.